Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History here on 12 Ounce Sports and the Captain Lou Sports Network on YouTube. Yours truly, Captain Lou, here joining you this evening. We welcome you to the program. Those of you that are new to our program, how it works is we take a look back at championship years in sports history. We pick a new year each month to spotlight. We started out our show looking at 1984 with a look back at some of the great teams, the Edmonton Oilers, the Detroit Tigers, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Brigham Young Cougars, all championship teams from 1984. Now we're going to spotlight a new year. We're going to start out this month or so with looking at the championship teams of 1997. And we thought we'd start out with a great look at taking a look at the Stanley Cup champion Detroit Red Wings, their first Stanley Cup in 42 years. Since 1955. And we had a chance to talk with someone who covered that Red Wings team, famous author of The Russian Five, Keith Gave, longtime reporter for the Detroit Free Press. He stopped by to help us look back at that 1997 Stanley Cup champion Detroit Red Wings team. Great interview. Can't wait to bring it to you. And we're going to get it to you live right after this here for 12 Ounce Sports. Hi, everybody. Captain Lou here from 12 Ounce Sports and, of course, the Captain Lou Extravaganza and Captain Lou's championship years in sports history. Hey, if you're like me, you love to go to ball games, baseball, football, basketball, whatever, minor league baseball, especially this summer. There's nothing better than a Saturday night game, major league or minor league baseball, Sunday afternoon. I've got the place for you to go to get those tickets for those games. Tickets.12ouncesports.com. We are a ticket broker, which means we don't charge you the exorbitant fees that you might see on some of those other secondary markets. Hey, if there's a concert you want to go to this summer, tickets.12ouncesports.com. Use the promo code 12ounce as well, and you'll get a better discount. Tickets.12ouncesports.com. It's that simple. Can't say it enough. For the best prices on tickets this summer, make sure you go to tickets.12ouncesports.com. And welcome back, everybody, to Captain Lou's championship years in sports history as we now turn our focus to the year 1997. And we thought it'd be great to spotlight the Detroit Red Wings and look at their run to their first Stanley Cup championship since 1955. And we thought we would bring in the author of the book, The Russian Five. And he was a longtime reporter for the Detroit Free Press. And Keith Gave joining us. Keith, thanks for taking time out to be with us. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Lou, and thanks for the invitation. It's always fun to talk about those years, I'm telling you.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun back then. It really sparked a lot of excitement in the Detroit area for a lot of long-suffering Red Wing fans like myself.
Well, there was a lot of pent-up anticipation for sure. Some serious disappointment in the years leading up to that 97 championship. I lived through them all. I'll tell you what, it's a lot more enjoyable to interview athletes after they've just won the Stanley Cup, as opposed to when they just, suffered a bitter first-round defeat and they're crying in the corner in the locker room.
Oh, boy. I can't imagine. You look back, they had some good teams, 94 when they lost to the Sharks, Chris Osgood, I can still see him after that game. And then, of course, 95 when they had the strike shortened year. We'll talk about that real quick.
Right.
They won the President's Cup trophy, which a lot of teams don't even want to get anymore once they get moving into the Stanley Cup playoffs. It seems it's almost like a jinx. But, I was stunned the way they got swept by New Jersey, as I think a lot of people were that year.
Everybody was, Lou. Everybody was. They crushed the 48 game regular season, right? They only played teams in the Western Conference. Detroit was in the West then, right?
Yeah.
And then they get into the playoffs. They're 12-2, 12 wins, 2 losses going into the finals, which is why everybody on the planet was picking the Detroit Red Wings, not just to win the Stanley Cup, but to sweep.
Yeah.
Well, it was a sweep, all right, but the wrong way.
Yeah, there was maybe a little-known goaltender in the Detroit area. We didn't know a whole lot about him back then by the name of Martin Brodeur. And he wasn't little known after that series. Boy, he made Detroit look pretty tame in that series, didn't he?
Well, he was awfully good, no question about it. But I'll tell you what I saw in that series was kind of the blueprint for what we saw of the Detroit Red Wings a couple of years later. You look at that Jersey team, the defense that they had: Scott Stevens, Ken Danico, defensive defenseman, Scott Niedermeyer, and Brian Rafalski. I mean, 4 legit number one defensemen. And 3 of them are probably 2 of them are in the Hall of Fame, and the other 2 should be considered. And then they had that really, really good fourth line, Bobby Holik and names. Randy McKay was one of them. A tremendous fourth line, which was sort of a precursor. Scotty Bowman's idea when he put the grind line together a couple years later. It was patterned after that New Jersey team that had a really, really good shutdown fourth line. The guy missing is Mike Peluso, big, tough guy on that Jersey fourth line. That was a really good line.
Well, it sure was, and so Detroit rebounded. Well, they got in 95, 96. I mean, they went on a tear. We all know the regular season they had set all kinds of records. They they didn't shatter it, but they beat Montreal's record for wins in the regular season, 130 some points. And again, it looked like they were headed for a potential return trip to the Stanley Cup Finals, but laying in the weeds for them was the Avalanche coming over from Quebec City, and they had a goaltender by the name of Patrick Waugh standing in their name amongst other people on that roster.
Well, you mentioned the right name there. He was the difference, of course. But what inspired that him winding up in Colorado in the first place, Lou, if you remember the game against Montreal where I think they beat the Canadiens 12-2 or something like that in Montreal, and a total embarrassment. They hung Patrick Waugh out to dry. He got in an argument with his coach when he finally was called in after 9 or 10 goals, and basically told the general manager first, and then the coach, "I'll never play for you again. I'm out of here." And they traded him to Colorado. And as soon as that deal was made, Scotty Bowman calls up his assistant coaches and says, "This is not good for us." Wow. And it turned out not to be.
You talk about that game, and I can always remember, I think Martin Trombley was the coach back then.
Yeah.
And he made it no secret that he disliked Scotty Bowman a ton. And every time I remember that, I remember him saying that, and I laugh every time I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of those moments, in the arc of the Stanley Cup, the Detroit Stanley Cup experience in the 90s, that game stands out as maybe a big reason why the Wings don't have another Stanley Cup to their war chest.
And so he goes to Colorado, and it just, I thought Detroit was going to cruise into that series. Again, you heard a little bit about him, guys like Joe Sakic and whatnot, Keith, but boy, they ran into a buzzsaw. And of course, we all know what happened, to Draper and all of that with Lemieux. And, obviously it served as a little motivation, but boy, oh boy, the way they steamrolled through that regular season, it just, again, was a shocker. And what you said at the top of the interview here, Keith, I couldn't have envied you at all trying to talk to those players after losing that series.
Well, yeah, that was a tough one, I'll tell you. Because they weren't planning a Stanley Cup parade by any means. They knew that they were going to have their work cut out for them in Colorado. They thought they'd be able to compete a little bit better against them. Listen, that Colorado team was a very, very, very good team. Detroit and Colorado those years mirrored one another just about. And the other team out west that mirrored those two teams was Dallas.
Yeah.
Those 3 teams were dominant out west. Detroit won 97, 98, Dallas won in 99, and Colorado's got a couple of Stanley Cups in there too. And the only real dominant team in the East was New Jersey, and they won a couple of cups in those years as well, that stretch of time from 95 on. But listen, I still remember seeing Chris Draper when he returned from the hospital to join his team after being, getting some repairs on that face that he had rearranged by that vicious check by Claude Lemieux in the was a early in the game, first period, I think. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But he went down badly, and it shook the team up, shook the whole Red Wings team up to see their teammate, take some abuse like that, and to listen, Chris Osgood. I mean, Chris Draper has one of the most beautiful smiles in the history of the NHL. I mean, he's just always happy-go-lucky guy, always smiling, always in a good mood. And to see his face get rearranged like that, just shattered. The guy had his jaw wired for 6 weeks, taking every meal out of a straw, for God's sakes. That was motivation for what followed, of course, in 96, 97. But I still remember Dino Ciccarelli talking to us afterwards saying, I can't believe I shook his bleeping hand, right. I don't know why anybody shook Claude Lemieux's hand at the end of that game, to be honest. And I'll tell you what, to this day, we haven't gotten there yet, but what happened between him and Darren McCarty in, the following spring, that set up the 97 Stanley Cup championship, the brawl at Julius Arena, to see Darren McCarty and Claude Lemieux getting together for these public, whatever money raising events. It kind of makes me sick to see those two guys together. And I know that it does a lot of Darren McCarty's teammates. They don't like it either, to be honest with you.
Wow. I tend to agree with you. I'm shocked that they did it. I've had a chance to meet and talk to Darren McCarty a couple of times. And I'm surprised that he does it, but obviously like you said, they do it for the reasons they do it. But it kind of reminds me now of how some of the pro athletes are in other sports. They're all friends now.
Oh yeah. Well, you're right. They're all union brothers for one thing. There's a lot less hate in all the games, but to see the one league that was able to sustain that hate a little bit, especially come playoff time, was the NHL.
Yeah.
But it's waning. You don't see much of that stuff anymore at all. And frankly, I think it makes for a much less interesting game.
Boy, I can't argue with you there, Keith. And you talk about Ciccarelli shaking his hand. I mean, that has got to be, I love the tradition. I love it. But that has got to be one of the toughest things to do after you beat the crap out of each other for 5, 6, 7 games. They're hating on each other right now. And so I will give players credit for doing that, but they only do it because they have to.
Pretty much. There are some special moments in that handshake line for sure. Former teammates coming together and so on. It's one of the great traditions. I hope it never ends.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see a little bit more truculence in the game these days, as Brian Burke would say, right?
Exactly. I love it. Well, Keith, so Colorado went on to just, in my opinion, annihilate Florida in that finals. I mean, I know
4-game sweep. Yeah.
Yeah, I know they won the final game in triple overtime, but even if they would have lost that game, I think they would have won it in a gentleman's sweep in 5 games, easy.
Of course. Yeah, I think so too. Yes. And it's really it really would have been cool if Detroit could have won and advanced to play Florida in the finals, because Florida was being run by Brian Murray and Doug McClain, who'd left Detroit. When Mike Ilitch fired Brian Murray and Doug McClain went along with him, they wound up in Florida, built a pretty good team down there, and Dan, who was an assistant coach in Detroit with Brian, and he was elevated to assistant general manager.
Yeah.
He was the coach down in Florida when they went. It would have been really cool to see Detroit play Florida that year, but it didn't happen.
Well, after the season, going into 97 or 96, 97, Keith, how much pressure was on Scotty Bowman going into that year?
I think there was a fair amount. Fair amount. He was convinced that his team wasn't ready yet, wasn't built yet for what they had to do. And it was pretty clear in that series against Colorado that they had to be better. They had to get better. And, he Scotty pushed really hard to make that trade for Brendan Shanahan,
Yeah.
which a lot of people think was the last piece of the puzzle. And I've said that myself, but when I think about it, he was an important piece of the puzzle to be sure. But comes from he made a couple of more trades. He picked up Hall of Fame defenseman Larry Murphy, who was being booed off the ice every shift in Toronto, came to Detroit, and continued his Hall of Fame career. And then he made another trade, a really good young centerman that I liked a lot, Greg Johnson. He traded him away for Thomas Sandstrom. It's good. You got bigger and stronger on the wing there, and so on, and finally had a team that could win a Stanley Cup. And my God, by then, not only did you have a whole bunch of Hall of Famers, the Russian Five, and Yzerman, Shanahan, Lidstrom, and so on, Thomas Holmstrom, but you had the grind line, which played a huge role in that season and several more seasons to come.
When they made that trade with Shanahan, they got rid of Coffey and Keith Primo. What was the reaction in the locker room when they made that trade?
Loved it. The players loved it because they had a Hall of Fame winger in Brendan Shanahan.
Okay.
Keith Primo was a serviceable number 3 center, I guess. Okay. And he was still young in his career, still developing, really. And he went on to have a very, very good career. He was captain of the Philadelphia Flyers for some time. Mm-hmm. And Paul Coffey was near the end of his career. He was traded to Hartford in that deal, and Hartford traded him at the deadline to Philadelphia, and he played against Detroit in the Stanley Cup Finals.
That's right.
And he didn't play very well, actually, but the players were thrilled to get a big, tough, strong, premier power forward in the NHL that Brendan Shanahan was at age 27 when they brought him in.
Yeah. They traded Cicerelli in the off season before that, if I'm not mistaken, for draft pick, correct?
Yes. Well, Scotty had a way of shedding players who had loose lips. All my great sources in that dressing room he traded away. Ray Shepard for Igor Larionov. Sean Burr, I love Sean. I miss him to this day. And of course, we were just talking about Cicerelli. They all talked a fair amount. The one guy who said what he wanted to say all the time, and Scotty couldn't do anything about it. One of my best sources in that room was Mike Vernon, the goaltender. Mike said whatever was on his mind, and Scotty had to deal with it because that was a goaltender who's going to win him the Stanley Cup.
Boy, I want to go back to what you said about getting Larry Murphy. I can remember when they got him at the deadline, and I had a couple of buddies of mine that were diehard Maple Leafs fans back then, and they couldn't believe that they traded him to Detroit for a song. And what a huge pickup. Boy, oh boy, I agree with you. That I think was the final missing piece right there.
Well, it was. Now, here's the thing. We just talked about New Jersey and the defense that they had, right? I mean, 2 Hall of Famers and 2 guys who, have pretty darn good credentials. You look at Detroit's defense now with Larry Murphy added. You got Nick Lidstrom and Larry Murphy, 2 Hall of Famers, right? Yeah. You got Slava Tisov, Hall of Famer. Vladimir Konstantinov, who would have been in the Hall of Fame had he finished his career. Would be in the Hall of Fame. 4 guys in the Hall of Fame on defense. That's how you win Stanley Cups.
Oh, absolutely. And, what did they ended up with 8 Hall of Famers on that roster, correct?
I think that's about right. And a few years later, they had even more.
Yeah.
In 2002, that team was loaded as well. That's when you can just write a check and get a player, right? You can't do that so much anymore.
No, that's funny. I just want to touch on that real quick. We talk about how, they had Sergei Fedorov and, the accolades and the comparisons that he got, that he was right up there with Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky, and I remember he turned down in 2003, I think it was $50 million over 5 years. And
that's correct.
I mean, that's big money right now, 20 years later. I couldn't believe it.
That's correct. And that's why you'll never see his name, his jersey in the rafters at Little Caesars Arena because of that. And keep in mind, that was the second time that he signed with somebody else.
Yeah.
Or that he left the team. In 1998, right after the Olympics, he signed a contract with CompuWare, with not CompuWare owner Pete Carmanos, who owned Carolina at the time. $38 million for 5 years. And but most of it was front loaded in bonuses.
Yeah.
It was really $2 million a year for 5 years and $28 million in bonuses, which had to be paid. If the Detroit Red Wings won the Stanley Cup again, they would owe Sergei Fedorov $28 million.
Wow.
$28 million in a matter of about 5 months. Marian Ilitch was so angry that, I mean, like she said, they had 5 days to match. They had 5 days to match that deal. And they said, well, what are we going to do? Let them go. We'll take the draft picks or whatever. We're not paying that kind of money. We might be well off, but it's all on paper. We don't have $28 million sitting in the bank that we just write them a check, right? Marion took Jimmy D along with them. Jim Devellano, the general manager at the time, senior vice president, and basically said, went to the top of Comerica Bank to see the president of the bank, and Marion laid it out for him. Said, we need $28 million in a very short time. If we win the Stanley Cup, we're going to owe this guy this much money. And the banker says, no problem. Whatever you need, we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. And she basically said, amortize it over 5 years. If we win the Stanley Cup, we're gonna pay it off early, which they did. But here's the thing: when you win a Stanley Cup in those years, you win a Stanley Cup, owners can expect to make $22, $24, $25 million, right? That's their profit when you have all those people in the stands for a whole bunch, 4 rounds of playoff hockey, right?
Yeah.
The Wings Mike and Marian Ilitch didn't make a dime that spring when they won that Stanley Cup because they had to pay Sergei Fedorov all that money. And that's one time that he betrayed them essentially. And then a few years later, they're trying to sign him again. Jimmy D's talking with 2 different agents. He can't figure out who to talk to, who to get this deal done to sign Sergei to make him a Red Wing for life, which is what they certainly intended. Mike Ilitch got frustrated and said, we're going to have a meeting. Jimmy D, Ken Holland, bring in Sergei. The 4 of us are going to talk this over. So they got Sergei in that meeting, the 4 of them, and Mike said, Sergei, we're to make this easy. We're going to give you $10 million a year for 5 years, $50 million. Sign the contract. You're going to be a Red Wing for life. And he said, well, Sergei essentially said, thank you, Mr. Ilitch. I'll think about it and get back to you. And he shook their hands and he left. And when he walked out, Mike Ilitch looks at the other 2 guys and said, that's it. He's gone. And Jimmy D said, what do you mean, Mike? He said he's going to think about it. He said, no. He said, when you get an offer like that, you shouldn't have to think about it. And of course, a few days later, he signed with Anaheim. Brian Murray's out in Anaheim at the time. 4 years, $40 million to leave Detroit and go play in Anaheim. He left $10 million on the table to leave Detroit. You think Marian Ilitch, as long as she's breathing, is ever going to see Sergei Fedorov's number at the top of the building at Little Caesars? Never. Never. And I can't blame her.
No, 100%.
I can't blame her.
100%. Unbelievable. We're joined by Keith Gave, longtime Detroit Free Press hockey reporter, of course, and has spent some time with the Dallas Morning News. Covered the Red Wings back in '97. Of course, author of the Russian 5. Gracious with his time. Keith, you talked about a little bit earlier in that regular season in 96, 97. You talked about how good Dallas was. They won the division that year. Detroit was second. You had Colorado. And then, of course, over in the other conference, you had Philadelphia and the Rangers. There was some loaded teams that, and there was almost, Detroit won the President's Cup the last 2 years. And, back then as a fan base, we were, we were nervous but excited, and they started out decent. But again, they in the regular season, if I'm not mistaken, they had losing records against everybody in their division except Toronto, who was in last
Right.
place.
Yeah. And I've talked to the players about that a lot. Brendan Shanahan is especially forthcoming about the team's attitude that season. I mean, they realized what they did the year before, that 131 point season, 62 wins.
Mm-hmm.
They expended a lot of energy to set those records. I mean, it was important to them. That's human nature. When you have something like that in sight, to beat Scotty Bowman's Montreal teams, for goodness sakes, with more points, more wins in a season. They worked really hard to get those records, right?
Yeah.
And they lost to Colorado in the semifinals. And they basically, as a group, they said, you know what? We're not going to bust our asses in the regular season. We know what it takes now. We're gonna pace ourselves, and we know what it takes in the playoffs. We're gonna get to the playoffs and have a little bit of energy left to play 4 rounds of playoff hockey, which is what they did. I mean, if you look at the way they finished the season, I don't know off the top of my head, they lost 5 of the last 7 games or something like that. They didn't finish very well at all. But when teams are often accused of flipping a switch, you can flip the switch or not. There's a debate about whether that can happen or not. Well, the Red Wings that in those days could do that. They were that good, and they knew it. Come playoff time, okay, new season, clean slate, let's go, and they did. And it was what they did in the Stanley Cup Finals that season, that spring, and to get to Philadelphia, that big, scary Legion of Doom line, and that team, everybody's picking, Philadelphia to do the same thing that New Jersey did 2 years earlier, and didn't quite work out for them, did it?
Was that the series, Keith, or was it Carolina that Shanahan said they skated by him in the opening game and they knew that they had him beat right from the get-go?
That was Philadelphia.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
they
what
were
I thought.
harder. They were heavier, harder, faster. Yeah. I mean, you look at the opening shift of that first game in Philadelphia. Who does Scotty have on the ice taking the opening faceoff? Who's it? You got world class centermen like Steve Yzerman and Sergei Fedorov, Igor Larionov, right? Who's taking the opening faceoff? Chris Draper against Eric Lindros with Darren McCarty and Kirk Maltby, the grind line against the Legion of Doom. And they outplayed them. They out-hit them. They out-skated them. And they scored an early goal, and the rest was history. I mean, Philadelphia had no idea what hit them.
No.
They were out of it from the middle of the first period onward. They were done. You could see it.
Oh, I can remember that line always sticks with me, what Shanahan said. They were skating around in the opening warm-ups, and he said they were looking at the Red Wings, and they had a look of fear in their eyes. And I mean, it's easy to say now, but it's kind of ironic. Then, of course, they swept them.
Yeah. It was a really fun series to cover, and a very, very fun night on June 7th, 1997, when they finally won their first Stanley Cup. There, it was quite a time.
Well, I bet it was. Going back to that playoff run, though, I can remember them playing. Have you ever witnessed a tougher sweep than Detroit had when they played Anaheim? I think
Anaheim.
3 of the 4 games were in overtime, triple and double.
Single, double, and triple overtime. Yeah. And I felt I couldn't help but feel bad for Anaheim. You got this young upstart expansion team. They played their guts out, and they had not. It looks like a sweep. It was a sweep, but it was about a 6-game sweep when you add up all the periods. For God's sakes, quite impressive the fight that Anaheim put up in that series.
Yeah, and then of course they get the rematch in the playoffs with the Avalanche, and what was it? Shanahan broke the tie to get them going in game 1, and boy, that you talk about retribution. What a great series that was.
Well, it sure was. And now we have to kind of rewind to March 26th, 1997. Yes. the brawl there where they had to settle a score,
Mhm.
and they did settle a score. And you know, when the Detroit Free Press, my former editor, Gene Myers, called me to help them put together a book about the final season at Joe Louis Arena. You know, they put together one of those great Free Press books that they did. And he said, we're putting a list of the biggest sporting events ever at Joe Louis. And he said, obviously, winning this first Stanley Cup on June 7th, 1997 was the biggest sporting event, you know. And I said, I'm not so sure of that, Gene. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm not so sure that if they don't, as Shanahan and many others have said all the time, if they don't find a way to beat Colorado in that game, the fourth time they played them, the last time, you're not just winning the fights. Winning the fights is one thing. You got to prove to yourself that you can beat that team. And as Shanahan said, if we would have lost that game and they were down 5-3 late in the third period, if you recall, of that game on March 26th, and came back to win it, and who scores the game-winning overtime goal? But Darren McCarty.
Yeah,
which is crazy. You know, in my second book, I hope you don't mind my mentioning that I wrote kind of a sequel to the Russian Five called Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah,
and it's just basically a bunch of good stuff that I had left over that I couldn't get in the Russian Five book, and a whole bunch of stories about Vladdy. And you know, Vladdy's on the cover with the Stanley Cup, and I'm donating a huge portion of the proceeds to Vladdy's Special Needs Trust.
Mm-hmm.
But in that, I did a little extra reporting for one chapter in that book. I called the referee, only one referee in that game. Remember, we had a two referee system. I called Paul Dvorsky, and I got him. I think, you know, I tried him several times, and he finally called me back on a Sunday evening. I think he might have had a couple of pops, and we're talking about that game. And I said, I want you to. I said, Devo, I said, I want you to just answer one question for me, please. It's driving a lot of people in Detroit crazy. How in the heck was Darren McCarty still in that hockey game to score that game-winning goal in overtime? Think about that. Yeah. Why wasn't he thrown out?
Right.
I mean, not only did he start that brawl and beat the hell out of Claude Lemieux, for which he got a double minor, by the way. He didn't even get a fighting major for that. Didn't even get a fighting major. And then, you know, as he's sorting out the all the combatants, you know, the linesmen are going, what about 25 here? He's out, right? He's out. And Dvorsky thought for a second. He said, you know what? No, he's not. I'm not throwing him out. And of course, McCarty he did get a fighting major in the second period. Didn't get thrown out again, and he was hung around to get that the game-winning goal in overtime. But I always thought that, and Dvorsky was really honest, really good. I said, what inspired you not to throw the guy out? He said, you know what? He said, we knew what was going to happen in that game. We were all well prepared. We got a call from the league. Watch out. It's going to be crazy tonight and so on. He said, but, you know, I get to the rink and we're getting dressed and all this stuff is on the news all over the place. We got it on TV and you know, everybody's talking about what's going to happen. And it happened, right? It happened. And Claude Lemieux was bloodied right in front of the Detroit bench. And Dvorsky, you know what he said? You know what? Paybacks are a bitch. That's the name of the chapter in that book. I thought that was pretty, you know, and that's the kind of hockey that we were just talking about a while ago. You don't see that kind of hockey anymore. No. And we won't see it again. But that I kind of like the league a lot better in those days than today.
You know, and the other thing that stands out to me about that game, Keith, is, you know, the big brawl. And of course, Vernon and Waugh ended up duking it out.
Yeah.
And when he scored that game-winning goal, Waugh rolled the puck down the other end, because wasn't that Mike Vernon's 300th victory?
Yeah, it was.
I thought, you know, that's old-time hockey there, and I give him credit. I give Patrick Waugh credit for doing that.
Patrick was one of my favorite people I've ever covered in hockey in all my years. I mean, he was talkative, good-natured, highly competitive. French Canadian hockey player, right? And
Yeah.
he was a fun guy to be around, a fun guy to cover. I covered him as my rookie season of 85-86, covering the NHL, covering the Red Wings, was his rookie season for the Montreal Canadiens, and he won the Stanley Cup for them, right? As a 19-year-old kid. I was so lucky to see the Stanley Cup being raised at the Montreal Forum at the end of my first year covering the NHL, and Patrick Waugh was the guy. But, back to my point about that March 26th game, if the Red Wings don't win that game, June 7th, 1997, probably doesn't happen. And the players will tell you that.
Yeah.
They had to prove to themselves that they could compete with Colorado. And, come 98, they play them again in the Western Conference Finals, and it was a different ball game, wasn't it?
Yeah. Totally different. 100% agree. What do you think when the final seconds went off, after that picturesque goal by McCarty in Game 4,
right?
What do you think? Was it the first sense? Was it relief or jubilation that they got the cup?
Oh, I think it was, if I had to pick one of those words, it was relief.
Yeah.
It was relief. I mean, these guys had so much pressure on them, so much pressure. I'm not sure another coach could have delivered that other than Scotty Bowman. I'm forever grateful to Scotty. He and I had our ups and downs, our shouting matches and so on. That's all over with. I had lunch with him a few months ago in Florida, and we had a very nice, a nice conversation. But I'm really forever grateful to Scotty Bowman because he gave me a championship team to cover.
Yeah,
in Detroit, my hometown. I know how important winning that Stanley Cup was to the sporting community, the hockey community, especially in those days. And it was I was really lucky, and I'm grateful to have been a part of it for sure.
So I got to ask you. You brought up your rookie season covering the Wings, and of course Montreal and Patrick Waugh. What is your favorite, or was your favorite hockey arena or barn to go to watch a game?
Ooh, oh man. Well, there are two.
Okay.
The Montreal Forum was special.
Yeah.
It was like people say it's like religion, and feel like you're at one of the cathedrals of hockey. It was really, really amazing. And I also adored Chicago Stadium because it reminded me of Olympia Stadium in Detroit, built by the same people and much the same. And the crowd, from the moment they started singing the national anthem, was great. And I saw a NHL All-Star game at Chicago Stadium in those years, and it was during the first Gulf War, 91, 92, something like that, right in there, when our troops were at war, and the singing of the Star Spangled Banner was as loud a crowd as I'd ever heard in my life. I mean, you literally could not hear yourself speak when you yelling at the guy next to you. It was pretty cool moment. But I liked those two arenas a lot.
Old Chicago Stadium, there is nothing like it. That's actually was the first place that I went to see a hockey game. I was raised up in the Upper Peninsula, so we didn't get the opportunity to go to Detroit much. And so I went there. That was my first, and that's a beautiful rink. I have to ask you this. How close was Steve Yzerman to getting traded to Ottawa?
Very close.
Yeah.
Very, very, very close.
Very close. That close. Okay.
If you ask Scotty Bowman about it today, you're going to get a lot of revisionist history. But they were really, really close for Alexei Yashin, this young center iceman in Ottawa at the times. Scotty likes his Russian players, but he had eyes for Yashin in a package for Steve Yzerman. Didn't think he'd ever be able to win with Yzerman for whatever reason, and there was serious talk, and the Wings started out on the road that season, and the talks were pretty intense. I mean, I think they were this close to pulling the trigger, and then they played their home opener that season, if you remember.
Yeah.
And when the players were introduced, and the last of the Detroit Red Wings players was number 19, Captain Steve Yzerman, and the crowd went crazy. The longest ovation that I can recall at Joe Louis Arena after when Gordie Howe was introduced at the All-Star game, shortly after Joe Louis Arena opened up back in 19. When did it open up?
Was it 1980?
1979.
79. Okay.
Yeah, 79. Gordie Howe got a tremendous standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes, But anyways, Yzerman gets this really, really long ovation, and pretty clear how the fans felt about their captain, right?
Yeah.
And then a few minutes later, Scotty Bowman was introduced as coach, and there was a loud chorus of boos. People let know their feelings. I mean, I was all over this. I've been writing about it, and actually wrote a column and saying, I think I addressed Mike and Marion Illich, you better watch what your coach is trying to do there, trying to trade this kid out of here. And Mike and Marion Illich saw that reaction, and it was either after the game that night or the next morning. Mike Illich called Scotty Bowman and said, "You're not trading my captain. He's not going anywhere."
Oh,
pretty great. But some of the best deals are the ones that aren't made, right?
Absolutely.
It was really close, though, Lou.
Wow. Unbelievable. Well, Keith, wow, this has been fun. I appreciate you taking time out to be with us here. Looking back at the 97 Stanley Cup champions. Thank you for your time. It's been fun. And as you and I talked earlier, I'd love to get you back on to talk about that rivalry with USA Hockey and the Canadian with the women. I would love to have you on back to talk about that.
Best rivalry in hockey, and I look forward to doing that one day with
All
you.
right,
Thank you. Take care.
All right. That, of course, Keith Gave, longtime reporter for the Detroit Free Press. He went for a stint with the Dallas Morning News, and, of course, the author of The Russian Five. And what great insight. What a great look back at that Stanley Cup champion Detroit Red Wings team from 1997. If you missed any of this interview, you can go back and look at it anytime you want on 12 Ounce Sports and, of course, on the Captain Lou Sports Network YouTube pages, 12 Ounce Sports and Captain Lou Sports Network YouTube pages, or 12ouncesports.com. Great insight. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Captain Lou's championship years in sports history, highlighting 1997 and, of course, the Detroit Red Wings and their Stanley Cup championship, at the time, their first one in 42 years since way back in 1955. All right, everybody. Again, thanks to Keith Gave for taking time out to be with us tonight. And thank you for taking time out to watch as well. This will be available as on podcast form as well on Apple Podcasts. So make sure you look for it there. All right, everybody. This is Captain Lou saying so long here on Captain Lou's Championship Years in Sports History, here on 12 Ounce Sports and the Captain Lou Sports Network. This reminder, keep your heads up, keep your sticks down, keep your feet moving, and as always, keep your minds open.